Here we have our concept model. Nothing unusual about this. It's done pretty dirty. A lot of bodies go deep into each other. No micro fillets. Nothing that would slow us down on the concept production. And I did nothing to prepare it for this process other than already splitting it into sets of static details like the slide, the lower part, the trigger, the safety, and the lever on the left. So let's start with the slide. Let's duplicate it. That's gonna be our low poly. So let's quickly do all the low poly things like deleting the text, deleting all the small insides of bolts here. And let's duplicate it again. It's gonna be our union boolean sheet as SHEET. Let's now delete any face that we don't need to turn it into a sheet body. Now cut it anywhere to force the recalculation, because we might have some cavities inside that didn't split when we deleted a face to turn it into a sheet body. Now let's duplicate it a couple of times. Let's hide the folder with them. And we're gonna first select our union sheet, and then we're gonna select details that do not touch each other on the surface. After that, we're gonna press Q for boolean, then Shift E for intersect, and then we're gonna confirm it. And this will create our outer shells. Let's disable all the sheets in the folder of the slide and put the original sheet body into the folder, because it now is one of the details. And let's just continue the process until there is nothing left. And now that we have a sheet base for the low poly, it's gonna be a great idea to adjust it, deleting all the unneeded surfaces, because it's gonna be quite a bit easier to do in CAD right now than later in polygonal software. Checking if I maybe deleted something I shouldn't have, but it looks alright. Let's now work on the lower part. Same thing, duplicating for the low poly. Let's quickly remove the materials again to make it a bit clearer what we are looking at, which version of it. Same thing with deleting all the small details that we don't need. Here I decided not to delete the ones on the sides, because they really change how those two details interact with each other with overlapping. Here I'm gonna quickly do some plasticity stuff to fix it, because it's quite dirty to just delete it. So let's duplicate it again and try to boolean. This one is quite a bit more complicated, so it's not gonna work from the first try. So let's boolean all we can and then try to see what the problems are. It's a good idea to use delete redundant topology every now and again. Just make it as simple as you can. And this worked. Same process again. Let's now delete any face to turn it into a sheet body. After that, cut it to force the recalculation, delete the inside cavities, and you're good to go. For the really simple stuff, I prefer not to do any of that because it's gonna be much faster to just union it and split it by hand. For the barrel, I'm gonna quickly extrude this circle, use match face to simplify the insides. Let's select our low poly base and export it as a step file. and then export our high poly as an OBJ. Time to open Pixies. Let's use the import wizard to import our step file. Get a nice angle to check the topology. And let's now adjust the minimum sag on the model. To better see the result, turn on the wireframe. And let's just play with it a bit. After that, let's export our file as an FBX. Now open Blender and import both low poly FBX and high poly OBJ into our scene. Make sure to add them into separate collections. The Pixies export comes as a system of parented bodies. So to make it a bit easier for myself, I unparent everything while keeping the transform right away. Time to work on the low poly a bit. Select any sharp edge, press Shift G to select similar by sharpness, and mark seam. Now let's clean up the mesh a bit. It's not that important for the poly count, it's more for the baking because it's not marmoset, it's not as easy and straightforward to bake. Sometimes you might have some weird errors. So I would advise you to clean up mostly the shapes that are freeform, like this. On flat surfaces, you should be mostly fine, no matter what you do. Sometimes details that are close enough to each other will decimate with slightly different resolution, and that we will have to fix by hand. Let's also add a bit more resolution to it, since it's a very small object and it's gonna be a focal point in the first person view. So I'm just gonna quickly subdivide those loops and use loop tools to relax. Here we can see that some of the meshes have imported with inverted normals. We're just gonna quickly fix that. Here we can see we made a little mistake where two of the separate objects are one mesh right now, and it's very easy to fix in polygonal software. So let's just separate it by selection and delete the rest that we don't need. Let's also check if there are maybe some faces we forgot to delete in CAD, which is going to be quite easy to do in polygonal software as well. While it's not as fast, sometimes it's even more useful because we can see the normal orientation in case we might create a huge hole that we will miss in polygonal, and we will have to remodel a lot of stuff for that. So now let's quickly unwrap it, and yeah, it's not perfect, but just looking at big details, it's quite obvious where we can add some extra seams to avoid overlaps and huge bends. After you're done with adding seams in the most obvious places and checking separate details for overlaps and fixing it, it's a good idea to just unwrap everything at once and check for overlaps on everything at once, and quickly go over highlighted parts, fixing it. Now it's time to align and straighten some of the most important UV islands to avoid aliasing issues. After doing the final unwrap, I would select every UV island and set the textile density to 10. Here I noticed that I might have a bit too much surface on the barrel and some of the unneeded faces, so it's never too late to fix. Now I am selecting every UV island that represents either a small or an important detail, or just something that, if it would be in a first person view, would be really close to the player. And then I set the texel density of it to be 20. Now let's use UV Pack Master to optimize our texture packing. Now it's time to use Zen Barbecue to create bevels on our high poly. Well, you can do a similar thing with using Bevel Shader node. It's really much easier to do with Zen Barbecue, and I would highly advise you to buy it. It's very cheap. Time to batch rename our collections. So everything in the low poly collection will get a new name LP, and everything in the high poly collection will get a new name HP. Let's now split it into bake groups. To make it a bit faster, I just make everything visible in the same spot and just double click the objects. If you're not familiar with the concept of bake groups, we want to split our model into different sets of details so they wouldn't interfere with each other during the baking process. After selecting the first set, let's move it into a separate collection. Now hide it and repeat the process until there is nothing left. Inside every collection, merge all the low poly objects into one, and same for the high poly, all high poly objects into one. So in every bake group there is only one low poly and one high poly. Let's now set the names for our objects. So in the bake group 1 you will have low poly called 1_LP and high poly will be 1_HP, and the same for every baking group. Use Text Tools add-on to quickly bake our first bake group as a test to see what should be the gauge extrusion and the ray distance numbers. For mine, I just know it's 0.003 and 0.03. So after previewing the material, it's probably because it's an old add-on. It usually sets the output into a different field, so we have to manually set it to be to normal. Let's change the properties of our material to quickly see how the bake went. It went good, so now let's select everything in the scene and press bake, checking the single texture below in the text tools. Now let's select everything again and bake the object normal. And for the sake of speed, instead of baking material ID and assigning it before, I just bake element ID. Don't forget to save our textures. Join all the low poly objects into one, triangulate it, and then export it as an FBX. We can finally open Substance Painter, drag and drop our model into it, and then load all the textures that we baked in Blender. Now set them, and let's bake everything that's left. Ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness. For ambient occlusion, I would advise you to turn on ignore backface, and for curvature, let's use the normal map to generate it. Now you have a model that is ready for texturing in Substance Painter. I guess that's it for this video.